I sold everything I owned at 65, packed 2 suitcases, and got on a plane to Colombia with about $40,000 in my bank account and absolutely no idea what I was doing. And honestly, that might have been the best decision I've ever made. My name is Marcus, and I'm now living in Colombia on less than $2,000 a month, while people back home are struggling to cover their rent in a single city. This isn't some fantasy or clickbait thing. This is real. And I'm going to tell you exactly how it happened, what it's really like day to day, and why I'd never go back to the States, even if someone handed me the keys to a mansion. I spent 40 years in Atlanta working in logistics. I was good at my job, made decent money, had the house with the mortgage I was never quite done paying, the car that was always just expensive enough to hurt, the retirement fund that looked decent on paper but terrified me when I actually thought about running on it until I was 90. I had all of it, the American dream, as they say. Except I wasn't dreaming anymore. I was just grinding. Every morning I'd wake up at 5:30, make coffee I didn't have time to enjoy, and drive 45 minutes to an office where I'd sit until 6 p.m., solving other people's shipping problems. By the time I got home, it would be dark, and I'd be too tired to do much of anything except make dinner, watch the news, and go to bed. Weekends I'd run errands or just collapse on the couch. I wasn't living. I was just managing. My wife, Patricia, passed away in 2018, cancer. We'd talked about traveling, about slowing down, about doing something different once I retired. And then suddenly she was gone, and I realized I'd been waiting for a someday that might never come. We'd mapped out this whole plan once. Nothing crazy, just a few weeks in Europe, maybe driving down the coast of California. But we kept saying next year, when things settle down, when I have fewer projects. And then there wasn't a next year. I spent the next 5 years working harder, if you can believe that. I think I was trying to outrun the grief. I'd volunteer for the big projects, the ones that required late nights and weekends. I made good money. I watched my 401k grow, and every single day felt empty. By the time I hit 65, I had a modest portfolio, a 4-bedroom house that felt empty, and a schedule packed with nothing. My kids were grown, busy with their own lives. Sarah, my oldest, was in Charlotte with her family. She had 2 kids, my grandkids, and she was running her own marketing firm. Michael, my son, was in Austin, working in tech. They'd call and check in, which I appreciated, but they had their own momentum. I was rattling around in that house like a ghost. I'd be there, alone, and it felt like I was haunting my own life. The kitchen where Patricia and I had cooked together was just this empty room now. The den where we'd read on Sunday mornings was just silence. I'd go to work, come home, watch television I barely paid attention to, and repeat. Then my neighbor Dave, who I'd known for about 15 years, mentioned casually at a barbecue that he and his wife were thinking about spending a few months in Mexico. Just to try it, just to see. And something in me clicked. Why not? Why am I still here doing this? I remembered Patricia saying, "Why do we save all our living for retirement?" It had frustrated me at the time because I thought she wasn't being practical. But she was right. We were just saving for a future that might not come, while letting the present slip away. I didn't tell my kids what I was thinking at first. I knew how it would sound. Sarah, my oldest, eventually sat me down and asked if I was okay. I realized I wasn't being subtle. She said she could hear it in my voice every time they called, that I sounded tired all the time, that I didn't sound like myself anymore. I told her what was going on, that I was thinking about leaving, maybe moving somewhere cheaper where my money could actually mean something, where I could have a different kind of life. I expected pushback. She had kids in school. She probably thought I was being irresponsible, that I should live near family, be a stable presence. She surprised me. She said, "Dad, you deserve to be happy. Mom would want that." And I cried. I actually cried, sitting in my kitchen in Atlanta, talking to my daughter on the phone. So I started researching. I looked at Thailand, Vietnam, Mexico, Central America. Colombia kept coming up over and over in the expat communities online. People were talking about it like it was this hidden gem. Good weather, incredibly affordable, friendly locals, surprisingly modern infrastructure in the cities. Everyone mentioned the coffee, the mountains, the energy of the place. But I also saw the warnings about crime, about bureaucracy, about how different it would be. I read testimonials from people who'd tried it and hated it, who said it was too isolated or too chaotic, or they couldn't handle the heat. I read from people who'd been there for years and said it changed their lives. What I didn't have was any Spanish beyond what you pick up from commercials. I could say hello and thank you and maybe order a beer, but that was about it. That actually worried me more than anything else. At my age, starting from scratch with a language felt almost impossible. But I figured people learn languages, and younger people do it all the time with less reason than I had. If I was going to do this, I'd have to commit to it fully. I started watching videos, reading blogs, downloading apps. I looked at cities. Bogotá seemed too big, too much like what I already knew. Pollution, traffic, the same urban pressures. Cali was supposed to be beautiful, but had a sketchy reputation for crime that I kept reading about. Then I found Bucaramanga. Bucaramanga is a city of about 500,000 people in the northeast of Colombia, nestled in a valley at about 3,000 feet elevation. It's called the City of Parks because there are parks everywhere. The climate is perfect, people told me. Not too hot, not too cold. About 72 degrees year-round. And the cost of living was maybe a third of what it was in Atlanta. It had the anonymity of a big city, but the feel of a smaller town. On paper, it looked perfect, but I'd learned to be skeptical. Everything looks perfect online until you actually live there. I visited for 2 weeks in March 2023, just a test run. I got a modest Airbnb in the Cabecera neighborhood, which is considered one of the nicest areas, and I just walked around, got a feel for things. The first thing that hit me was the mountain air. It was cool and clean. The city has this vertical quality to it, with older colonial buildings mixed in with newer ones, parks everywhere, and mountains visible from almost any point. I ate at local restaurants and realized my money went so much further. A lunch with fresh juice and coffee cost $3 or $4. I'd sit at these little cafes and watch the city move. A decent dinner with protein, rice, vegetables, and a drink was maybe $8. I went to a place called Donde Marisa and had the most incredible ajiaco for $3, and it was better than anything I'd had at a fancy restaurant in Atlanta that probably cost $40. The people were warm. The streets had character. There was music everywhere, especially on weekends. People smiled at you. I went into a small bakery one morning, couldn't really communicate what I wanted, and the woman behind the counter just smiled and made me a coffee and gave me a pastry. When I tried to pay more than she was asking, she waved me off. I stood there for a moment and then I just left. But I thought about that moment all day. When's the last time that happened in America? I cried in my Airbnb that night, and I'm not really a crier, but something in me had unclenched. I went back to Atlanta, and I started the process. I put the house on the market. It sold in 4 weeks to a young couple who had a baby on the way. They seemed happy about it, and that helped. The furniture I didn't want, I donated or sold. My kids came and took some things. While Sarah and I were going through my office, I found a journal Patricia had started before she got sick. Just notes about places she wanted to visit. Colombia was on the list. I hadn't even known. And that was it for me. That was the moment I knew this was the right thing. It wasn't just something I wanted to do anymore. It was something she would have wanted. I liquidated most of my stock positions, paid the taxes, and ended up with about $43,000, which I moved into a mix of a U.S. savings account and started shifting some into Colombian pesos. People online told me I'd need at least $2,000 a month to live well in Colombia, maybe $25,000 a year. I had nearly twice that, which meant I could actually build in a cushion, travel a bit, not live like I was on a shoestring budget. I could make mistakes and recover from them. I could afford to have a life, not just survive. The flight from Atlanta to Bucaramanga was long. I had a connection through Miami, and by the time I landed, I was exhausted and terrified. I had 2 large suitcases, a backpack, and about $2,000 in cash in my money belt. Everything else I owned was either sold, given away, or in storage back in Atlanta, which made me feel lighter and more terrified at the same time. I came through customs and they barely glanced at my passport. I walked out into the street in Bucaramanga and suddenly I was just there. No safety net, no home to go back to. It was exhilarating and completely nauseating at the same time. I'd booked a room in a guest house in Cabecera for the first month. It was run by a Colombian woman named Rosa and her adult daughter, Valentina. The room was simple but clean. Bed, small desk, bathroom with a decent shower, $30 a night. I'd done the math. That was $900 a month for housing, and that was before I found my own place. Rosa took one look at me coming through the door, dragging my suitcases, and I think she understood immediately. She didn't ask a lot of questions. She just showed me the room, gave me the Wi-Fi password, and told me breakfast was available if I wanted it. She made arepa and cheese and coffee every morning. If I needed anything, I should ask Valentina, who spoke English. That first morning, I woke up at 4 a.m. with jet lag and this surreal feeling. I was in Bucaramanga, Colombia, and I'd sold my house. There was no going back, not really. If this didn't work, I'd have to figure out something else. But returning to Atlanta wasn't an option because I had nowhere to return to. I lay there in the dark for about an hour, my heart pounding. What the hell had I done? I went downstairs to the common area, and Rosa was already making coffee. She didn't speak much English, but she smiled and handed me a cup of what was literally the best coffee I'd ever had. I later learned that Bucaramanga is surrounded by coffee farms, that the altitude and the soil and the tradition made coffee here something special. This wasn't something you got at Starbucks. This was the real thing. I'd spent 40 years drinking mediocre coffee in paper cups, and here was this woman giving me better coffee than I'd ever tasted. Rosa said something to me in Spanish, and I just smiled back helplessly. She laughed, kindly, and repeated it slowly. I eventually understood she was asking if I slept well. I nodded. She patted my shoulder and handed me a small plate with fresh bread and cheese and a slice of avocado. The bread was still warm. I sat on the patio as the sun came up over the mountains that surrounded the city. The air was cool and clean. There were birds I'd never heard before. In the distance, I could hear the city waking up. Car horns, motorcycles, someone's radio playing reggaeton. But it wasn't aggressive or overwhelming. It was just the sound of a city waking up, and I was here for it. I realized I was smiling for the first time in years. The first few weeks were a honeymoon period, but I knew it. Everything was new and interesting. I explored the neighborhood, figured out where the good restaurants were, where to get groceries, how the bus system worked. I downloaded Duolingo and started the slow, humbling process of learning Spanish. At 65, learning a language is harder than it was when I was younger, but it's also slower, which somehow makes you more aware of what you're actually learning. Every word felt like an accomplishment. Every conversation where I understood even half of what was said felt like a victory. I made mistakes constantly. I went to buy milk and somehow ordered raw chicken. The woman at the store was very patient. I tried to ask someone for directions and definitely propositioned a man instead. He thought it was hilarious. People were patient with me, mostly amused. One woman at the grocery store, Margarita, started to recognize me and would wait while I slowly parsed the words on items I wanted to buy, helping me along. She never made me feel bad about it. She just treated me like I was learning. After a month, I moved into an apartment. Rosa had mentioned a place to me. Someone in the same neighborhood was renting out a one-bedroom with a small kitchen and a nice living area. The rent was $450 a month. I'd paid more than that in electricity in Atlanta. I signed a 6-month lease just to test it, and the landlord, a man in his 70s named Hector, seemed relieved that someone responsible was taking the place. He'd been renting it out to a series of tourists and short-term people, and I think he wanted something more stable. The neighborhood of Cabecera is what locals call the best place to live in Bucaramanga. It's clean, it's got cafes and restaurants, the parks are nice, and there's a decent mix of locals and expats, so you don't feel completely isolated if you want to interact with English speakers, but you're also immersed enough that you have to engage with the culture. The apartment complex had a small pool, which hardly anyone used, and a courtyard where people would sit in the evenings. There was a guard at the gate, which made me feel safer, though I wasn't sure how much actual security it provided. I spent my first full week in the apartment basically setting up the essentials. I got a Colombian phone number and a basic smartphone plan for about $30 a month, which included unlimited calls and texts to the US. That meant I could stay in touch with my kids affordably. I opened a bank account, which was surprisingly easy with help from Hector. He came with me to the bank, spoke to the manager, basically vouched for me. Within an hour, I had a Colombian account and a debit card. Later, I learned this wasn't normal, that Hector had done me a real favor. It became clear that this was how things worked here. People helped because they wanted to, not because they felt obligated. My groceries cost me about $80 to $100 a week. I could eat well, fresh produce, meat, everything. I'd go to the local market and get bananas, avocados, tomatoes, cilantro, and it would cost almost nothing. A bunch of bananas was about 50 cents. Avocados were $1 for 3. A pound of chicken breast was maybe $3. Fish was cheap. Eggs were $1 a dozen. I learned to cook more than I had in Atlanta, partly because I had the time, and partly because eating out, while incredibly cheap, gets old. There's a real coffee culture here, bakeries on every corner, so my breakfast, coffee and a pastry, cost about $1.50. I'd sit in a little cafe, drink the coffee slowly, and read the news on my phone. It was meditation. Healthcare was the thing that really shocked me. I'm 65, so I need to think about medical care. Back home, even with Medicare, I'd have copays, deductibles, prescription costs. A doctor visit was a production. You'd call, wait 2 weeks for an appointment, go in, maybe get charged a $100 copay. Here, I could go to a private clinic, pay cash, and see a doctor the same day for about $30. The doctors I saw were well-trained, friendly, and actually had time to talk to me. I went for a blood pressure check, and the doctor spent 20 minutes with me just talking about my health. Prescriptions were a fraction of the U.S. cost. I got my blood pressure medication filled for $4. Blood pressure medication that would cost $50 a month in the U.S. My asthma inhaler was $6. I got a skin cream for a minor issue that cost $2. I couldn't believe it. I enrolled in a private health insurance plan that included dental and vision, comprehensive coverage for about $40 a month. If I'd needed surgery, it would have been more, but still less than a typical U.S. deductible. I met an American man named Jim at a cafe who'd had surgery here, hernia repair, paid about $1,500 out of pocket with a private surgeon in a nice clinic, and said the care was excellent. He said in the U.S., even with insurance, he would have paid $3,000 at minimum. The surgery was done, he was back to normal activity in 2 weeks, and the doctor had even called to check on him a few days afterward. That doesn't happen in America. Transportation was interesting. There's a metro system in Bucaramanga, and a ride costs about 30 cents. I'd load money onto a card and just tap it at the turnstile. There are buses, though getting on them at first felt chaotic because they run on no fixed schedule. They just circulate constantly, and you have to jump on and off at your stop. The first time I took a bus, I was terrified I'd miss my stop, but people are patient, and they'll point you in the right direction if you look lost. Taxis were affordable, maybe $2 or $3 anywhere in the city depending on distance. I eventually got comfortable enough with the buses to use them regularly, and it became part of my routine. You develop a rhythm. You start recognizing the routes, the drivers, the other regular passengers. There's a woman who takes the same bus every morning, and we exchange nods. It's community without conversation. I didn't own a car. I seriously considered it, but parking was a pain, traffic was getting worse, and honestly, I didn't need one. Most of what I wanted was within walking distance or a 5-minute bus ride. I'd walk to the grocery store with a backpack, grab my coffee, stop at the park. It was a slower way of living, and I realized I'd forgotten how to do that. In Atlanta, everything was optimized for speed. Get in the car, drive, get out, do the thing, get back in the car, drive home. Here, I'd take a bus. Maybe it would take 15 minutes, and I'd just sit and watch the city go by. People would get on and off. Vendors would walk through selling candy or phone chargers. Someone's baby would be crying. You're just part of life happening around you. That's human-scale living. Socially, things develop more slowly. The first month, I went to a Spanish conversation group at a local cafe. There were about 8 of us, a mix of expats and Colombian English learners. It was awkward at first, but the Colombian man who ran it, Carlos, was patient. He'd take a word we'd mangle and gently correct it, but in a way that made it funny, not humiliating. One time I tried to say I was embarrassed, but said something that meant I was pregnant. The whole group laughed, and Carlos said, "No, Marcus, not pregnant, just shy." I started going twice a week, and slowly I got more comfortable. My comprehension improved, and then I began trying to speak more. At the group, I met a woman named Catherine, who was American, from New Jersey, and had moved to Bucaramanga about 3 years earlier. She was retired, early 60s, and had been living alone. She basically took me under her wing. She took me to the grocery store, introduced me to other expats, helped me navigate bureaucratic stuff that didn't have English instructions. We weren't romantically involved, but she was a good friend, and that helped a lot. She'd been exactly where I was, that fresh off the plane disorientation, and she understood. When I got stressed about something, she'd say, "Don't worry, in 3 months you'll wonder why you were ever worried about that." And she was always right. Through Catherine, I met a rotating group of other Americans and Europeans who'd settled here. Jim was in that group. A couple from Australia who'd converted a house into a small guest house. A German man named Klaus who'd been in Colombia for 12 years and basically took new arrivals under his wing. He'd invite people over for dinner, introduce them to other long-termers, help them get set up. None of us were trying to live in an expat bubble, but there was something comforting about having people around who understood what you'd given up and why. We'd talk about the stuff we missed, the stuff we didn't miss at all, and the stuff we'd never expected to miss. But most of my life here was with Colombian people. My barber, Oscar, was a man in his 50s who cut my hair every month for $4 and always asked about my daughters. He had 3 kids himself and wanted to know everything about the U.S. He asked me if it was true that Americans had so much food that some of it spoiled in their houses. I told him yes, and he couldn't quite believe it. My landlord Hector and I would have coffee several times a week. He'd tell me about his life, his late wife who had died around the same time as Patricia, his kids who'd moved to Medellin for work. We bonded over that shared experience, I think. We'd both been left behind. He'd sit with me on the patio sometimes, and we'd watch the sunset in silence. That became our thing. The restaurant I ate at most was called La Casita de Doña Rosa, run by 2 sisters, Rosa and Consuelo, both in their 70s. They didn't speak English, but they knew me by my 3rd visit, and they'd smile when I came in. I'd sit at the same small table, and they'd bring me whatever was good that day. A plate of ajiaco, this incredible chicken and potato soup native to the region, made with corn and avocado, or bandeja paisa, a huge plate of beans, rice, meat, a fried egg, salad, and an arepa, plus fresh squeezed juice, usually limeade. The whole meal was about $4, and the food was made with care by people who'd been doing it right for decades. I could taste the difference. This wasn't mass-produced. It was handmade with ingredient quality you could detect. One day I tried to ask Rosa how long they'd had the restaurant. My Spanish was getting better by then, maybe 3 months in. I definitely butchered the question. What came out probably sounded like I was asking when they'd been arrested. Rosa stopped, looked at me, and then understood. She and Consuelo laughed so hard that other customers looked over. She patted my cheek and said slowly, 30 años, 30 years. She pointed to a faded photo on the wall from 1994, Rosa, much younger, with her husband and Consuelo. I asked what happened to the husband, and she touched my hand and said, Ahora con Dios, now with God. Her eyes got watery. I suddenly understood. We were both sitting there, 2 people who'd lost spouses, on opposite sides of the world, living similar lives. I started to understand that everyone here had a story, had losses, had overcome things. It made me feel less alone in my own grief, less like I was the only person who'd had a pivot point. People here didn't have the luxury of pretending their lives were what they'd planned. They just adapted, they moved on, and somehow that was comforting. The cost of living really did work out like people said it would. I was spending about $600 a month on rent, $150 on utilities, $80 on internet and phone, $100 on groceries, $40 on insurance, and maybe $200 on restaurants and entertainment. That's about $1,100, and I wasn't even being careful. I was living well, not like I was penny pinching. I had money left over, about $800 to $1,000 every month that I could put aside or spend on things. I took a trip to Medellin, and that cost me about $300, including the flight, hotel, and food for a week. I went to Santa Marta and visited some beaches, stayed in a nice hostel, ate at good restaurants, took boat tours. That was another $300. I took Spanish lessons with a private tutor, twice a week, at about $6 per hour. Sophia was brilliant and actually challenged me. She wasn't just having conversations with me. She was teaching me grammar, the subjunctive tense, the different ways to use past tense. For $60 a month, I was getting better education than I could get anywhere in the US for hundreds of dollars. What surprised me was that things weren't just cheap, they were good. Cheapness didn't mean low quality. My apartment was nice, my food was delicious, the medical care was professional, the coffee was exceptional, the city was clean. I wasn't living like I was poor or slumming. I was just getting more value for my money. In Atlanta, a nice apartment would have been $1,500, $2,000 a month. Here, for $450, I had a place that was perfectly nice, safe, and comfortable. The US isn't expensive because the quality is better. It's expensive because that's what the market will bear. By month 4, I'd signed a 1-year lease on the apartment. I'd bought a used laptop so I could stay in touch with my daughters over video calls. I'd joined a gym, about $10 a month, and started working out regularly, something I'd been too busy to do in Atlanta. I had a barber, a doctor, a favorite restaurant, a language conversation group, close friends, and a routine that felt like living, not just existing. I knew the people at the cafe where I got coffee. I knew which restaurants had which specialties. I knew which bus route went where. I knew the names of the parks. I was building a life. I called Sarah one evening and she asked me how I was doing. I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd been able to give her a real answer. Not fine, busy, but genuinely happy. I was sleeping better, interested in things, learning and growing, meeting people. Yes, I was lonely sometimes. Yes, I missed certain things about home. But I wasn't depressed, and I hadn't been depressed for a long time before I left. "Dad," she said, "you sound like yourself again. Like I remember you being before Mom got sick." That stuck with me. My own daughter noticed the difference. That's when I knew I'd made the right decision. By the time I'd been in Bucaramanga for 6 months, I could have a real conversation in Spanish. Not perfectly, not without mistakes, but I could order food, ask directions, have small talk with people. I could read Spanish news, slowly, and understand most of it. I was learning about Colombian politics, history, culture, not just observing from the outside. I understood why people were frustrated, what their violence meant to them, how the drug trade had affected different regions. I was engaged, not just passing through. I also understood by then the downside to this life. Things weren't perfect, and I want to be honest about that. There's a lot of YouTube content about expat life that makes it sound like you're sipping cocktails on a beach forever, and that's not real. And if you come here with that expectation, you're going to be disappointed. Colombia has real crime. Not every neighborhood is safe. I was careful about where I went at night, never walked around with my phone out or wearing jewelry or carrying cash. In Bucaramanga, Cabecera and San Alonso are the nice neighborhoods. Other areas have problems. I learned which to avoid. I wasn't living in fear, but I was smart about it. One night I went to a restaurant that was supposed to be good, but turned out to be in a sketchy area. I got back in the taxi immediately. I've had worse happen to me in Atlanta, things people don't talk about. But here, I was more careful, and that was the smart move. The infrastructure is less developed than the US in some ways. Roads have potholes. Power goes out occasionally, maybe once or twice a month for a few hours. When it happened, I'd read, go to a cafe with a generator, or talk to neighbors. It wasn't ideal, but manageable. Internet could get spotty when it rained. I learned to do important things in the morning or find somewhere with backup power. These were adjustments, not disasters. You learn not to take electricity for granted. Healthcare is much cheaper, but it's a different system. I couldn't just call and get an appointment next week. I had to pay cash, track costs, deal with paperwork, understand my insurance. It worked fine, but I had to be more engaged with my health. I couldn't be passive about it. The weather is great, but it rains every afternoon. Sun, heat, then around 2 p.m., rain. It's predictable, so you plan around it. Laundry and errands in the morning. You carry an umbrella. The city has a rhythm, and you adapt to it. Culturally, there are things I missed. American football, specific kinds of food. I missed a good bagel, which doesn't really exist here. Efficiency in some contexts. Americans are efficient, and Colombians generally are not. Things move slower. Bureaucracy is a process. You make an appointment, and they might not have your information when you arrive. It's just how it is. You learn to accept it. I spent a full day trying to get a document notarized. It required going to 3 different offices, each of which had slightly different requirements. In Atlanta, it would have taken 30 minutes. Here, it took 8 hours. But the cost was $2, and everyone was polite, so I couldn't even be that angry about it. I also missed my daughters. I missed seeing my grandkids. My grandson James is 8 now, and I get to see him maybe once a year when Sarah visits. I missed cold winters. I know that sounds crazy after complaining about Atlanta heat, but there's something about a clear winter day in the mountains near home that stays with me. I also missed some friendships. I had people I'd known for decades in Atlanta. That's not nothing. I tried to stay in touch, but time zones, busy lives, it's hard. Some friendships were based on convenience, proximity, routine. When you remove that, they fade. That was a loss I didn't fully anticipate. But here's what surprised me. I didn't miss the lifestyle I'd had. I didn't miss the house, even though I loved it. I didn't miss driving everywhere. I didn't miss that constant anxiety about money, healthcare, the future. Yes, life here required adjustments, but it was more peaceful. There was freedom in not being responsible for a 4-bedroom house. No maintenance, no property taxes, no insurance costs. My expenses are simple and transparent. I know where my money goes. I don't have that stress anymore. I started understanding something else. I was helping the local economy. My rent went to Hector and his family. His daughter used it for university. My food went to Rosa and Consuelo. My gym membership went to a young guy building a business. My money actually meant something to someone. In Atlanta, I was a number in a system. Here, I was a customer, a person people recognized. Oscar the barber could send his kids to school because I came in for haircuts. That's a different relationship to money, more direct, more honest. By month 8, I started volunteering with a local English teaching organization, a couple of hours a week. I'd never thought of myself as a teacher, but I was decent at it. Worked with kids, teenagers, adults. It was rewarding in a way my logistics work never was. I did it because I liked the students, because I could see them progress, because they got excited when they learned something new. A 16-year-old girl named Maria, she came to me barely able to speak English, and after a few months she could actually have conversations. She wanted to go to university in the US, and I was helping her get ready for the TOEFL exam. That mattered. That meant something. I started documenting my life, pictures, journal entries. My daughter suggested I write about it because people would be interested. I resisted at first. The last thing I wanted was to become an influencer. But I started a blog to keep my daughters in the loop about what I was doing. Pictures of the city, reflections on things I'd learned, some of the funny language mistakes I was still making. I wrote about the day I successfully argued with a shopkeeper about the price of vegetables, about the first time I understood an entire conversation between two strangers on the bus, about the moment I realized I'd stopped counting down time until I could go home because this was home. The blog got more readers than I expected. People thinking about retirement, leaving, what comes after your working life ends. They'd ask me questions. What's the real cost? What do you really need? Are you lonely? Would you go back? Is it worth it? Let me answer some of those now. The real cost, for me, living alone, in a nice neighborhood, eating well, with insurance, was about $1,300 to $1,400 a month. That's not tight. That's comfortable. If you wanted to live cheaper, you absolutely could. Some people make $1,000 a month work, but they're not living in the nicest neighborhoods, and they're being more careful. They might live in a smaller apartment, eat at the cheapest places, skip home internet and use mobile data. Or you could spend $2,500 to $3,000 if you wanted luxury. Eat out every meal, hire help, travel constantly. The range is much broader than in the US. Even at the high end of comfortable living here, you're still spending half of what you'd spend in a major US city. What do you need? Patience, flexibility, the ability to not panic when things don't go exactly as planned, willingness to learn and accept you'll make mistakes, good health, a savings cushion. And you can't expect this to fix internal problems. If you're depressed in New Jersey, you'll be depressed in Colombia at first. But if you're burned out and looking for change, that's transformative. I wasn't running from something dark, I was running towards something brighter. That's the difference. Am I lonely? Sometimes. Less than in Atlanta, but yes. The first 3 months, I'd go home to a quiet apartment, realize I hadn't had a real conversation all day. But I pushed through. I forced myself to the conversation group, new restaurants, things I was nervous about. Loneliness is something you fight. If you come to Colombia planning to sit alone in your apartment, it won't work. You have to be willing to engage, to be uncomfortable, to say yes to invitations. Would I go back? Not to live. I might visit, show my grandson Atlanta, drive through old neighborhoods. But to live there, go back to how it was? No. I'm 67. I don't have years left to figure this out. I know now. This is it. This is where I'm supposed to be. Is it worth it? Yes, absolutely. I traded material comfort for real comfort. Less stuff, fuller life. Less money in the bank, more to spend on living. Less convenience, more time. And time is what actually matters. I don't sit in traffic for 3 hours a week. I don't go to a job that makes me anxious. I don't pay thousands in insurance and utilities and maintenance. I just live. That's the trade-off, and it's absolutely worth it. Let me be clear. This isn't a solution to structural problems in the U.S. I'm not saying the healthcare system is broken and you should leave. I had the luxury of savings, good health, and white privilege that made this easier. Not everyone can do this. Not everyone should. But for people who have options, this is a different way to live, and I don't think enough people know it's possible. We're told retirement means staying put or moving to Florida. Nobody talks about starting over in another country with better quality of life and lower costs. My daughters are proud of me, I think. Sarah visits next month. I want to take her to La Casita de Doña Rosa, introduce her to Rosa and Consuelo, show her the parks, neighborhoods, my favorite coffee spots. I want her to see why I'm happy. My son, Michael, he's more skeptical, thinks I'm being irresponsible. He wanted me to live near them, move to Texas where he is. But he's starting to come around. He called last month asking what the Spanish word for coffee was, then asked about the rental market, about residency requirements. That felt like acceptance, like he's starting to understand this isn't a phase. What surprised me most? How quickly the fear went away. Those first few weeks, I'd wake up thinking I'd made a terrible mistake, that I was too old, that I'd never adjust. But humans are adaptable. Within months, this place felt normal. Within 6 months, it felt like home. Within a year, I couldn't imagine being anywhere else. The fear just evaporated. Every day I didn't panic proved I could handle it. I think about Patricia sometimes. She'd be happy that I finally did something we'd talked about. She loved adventure, people, new things. She used to say people spend their lives planning for retirement without knowing what to do with it. A waste of the gift. This is what she would have wanted. Not to stay static, not to be safe, but to actually live. She would have been excited about Colombia, wanted to try the food, talk to people, learn the culture. I play chess sometimes at the park near my apartment with a man named Diego. He's 72 and has lived in Bucaramanga his whole life. He speaks no English. I speak Spanish well enough now that we can talk, though mostly we just play. One day I asked him if he'd ever thought about leaving, going somewhere else. He looked at me like I was crazy. Why would I leave, he said. Everything I need is here. I understood him then in a way I wouldn't have before. Because now I feel the same. Everything I need is here. Not everything I want, not every comfort, but the essential things. Good coffee, good people, a pace of life that lets me breathe, time, security, purpose, community. Diego had figured that out 70 years ago. It took me until I was 67. I'm 67, and I'm finally not running, not waiting, not thinking about what comes next, because I'm actually here, living it. I wake to bird sounds, coffee better than anything in the U.S., friends, a routine that brings joy, purpose, time. That's everything. My advice to anyone considering this: don't wait until you're 65. Don't wait until your wife dies and you realize you wasted all that time. If you're thinking about it, if you feel that pull towards something different, stop waiting for permission. Start researching. Take a trip. See if it resonates. Life is short, it goes fast, and you won't get this time back. Worst case, you try it and go back. But most likely you'll find something better, a different way to live. But be realistic. It's not a vacation. It's living, with all its complications. You can't escape yourself if you're running from something internal. But if you're running towards something, if you're chasing a different life, that's real, possible, worth it. You'll make mistakes, get confused, miss things, have doubts, but you'll also wake up one day and realize you're happy, that this was exactly what you needed. I'm happy. For the first time in years, genuinely happy. That's what brought me here. That's what keeps me here. And when I wake to the sound of birds I don't know the names of, in a country I chose to call home, with a life that feels like actual living, I know I made the right choice. Every single day, I know that.